I've been. Dreams are seeds we plant, my friend. Dusty boots, but a heart of gold. Your story's waiting to be told. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small but shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Cowbell ring and feel the beat. Hustle hard, don't take a seat. Every step you're blazing trails. Inventive journey never fails. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small but shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small but shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small but shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Your time is now, your stars align. Your time is now, your stars align.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Yuri Cataldo. And Yuri started his journey. Went to college and was while working on at Juilliard to work on a Broadway play. Worked on Broadway and for set and costume design for a period of time, and then 2008 came around and hit the industry hard. So shifted gears and started a bottled water company, and then launched an entrepreneurial, if I cannot get tongue-tied, program. Worked for several startups. Did some studies at MIT for a bit, and then moved to what he does now, which is in the AI market analysis and how competitors looking at how competitors are working on competing products. So, with that much as a short introduction, welcome on the podcast, Yuri.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Devin, so much. It's an absolute honor to be here.
Absolutely excited to have you on. So, well, I just gave a quick overview to a much longer journey. So why don't we rewind and unpack that just a bit, and tell us a little bit about how your journey got started, going off to Juilliard and studying to be on Broadway.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I come from a creative background. Both of my parents immigrants and I'm from northern Indiana originally, and both my parents they started their own companies, and they both have some kind of their own creative, let's say, stint in there. In that, like, so my dad was a professional chef. He eventually then started a construction company and was remodeling people's interior. My mom was an art consultant in the beginning, and then eventually moved into a couple other areas. And so while theater, the arts, not my initial push, that's where I ended up post college. I originally went to school for engineering and realized that it was the design side that I really liked, and so got involved into some actually stumbled into theater and found that it coupled a lot of things that I liked. And so I graduated from India University and then was accepted into Juilliard. They have a special program for aspiring, actually, like designers and directors. And essentially, I was working in hand with the opera, dance, and drama division. And so you kind of just get asked to work with each of those in various time uh, intervals. On the actually, I was on the design side, predominantly the costume design side. And so because it's Juilliard, they bring in draw Broadway level designers to do student shows. And then so you make a lot of connections. It also is a nice way to understand how the business of theater operates in New York because you're interacting with the same individuals that I eventually would interact in my professional career. So that was great. I was there for a year and then was accepted into the Yale Drama School program. And so I moved to Connecticut and was there for 3 years, getting my MFA in production design. And then once I graduated, moved back to New York. And at the same time, I was working on a couple of films and 3 Broadway productions simultaneously. Broadway doesn't pay a lot in the beginning. Yeah. And so especially on the design side, so I was one of the assistants on a few different productions. And so I was working 6, 7 days a week, 14, 16 hours a day, just kind of shopping, getting a lot of things done. And then, in the evening, I would also do a lot of my own design work. And so in the early days, it was a lot of balance and then just trying to realize what it was like to be a professional designer and operate in the New York theater world, which was both exciting and exhausting at the same time.
And just out of curiosity, kind of what were the movies or plays that you worked on? Anything that people would be able to search or Google or otherwise find?
Oh, yeah. So the movie I worked on, so the largest one is called When in Rome, and it stars Kristen Bell and I think I'm somewhere in the credits. But essentially, there's an opening scene where they're in a wedding. That wedding was filmed in New York City, and I did all of the extras. So, like everybody in the background of that wedding, I shopped all of their clothing. I worked on an independent film with Al Pacino called Wild Salome. Um, and that was an interesting, again, since an indie film you could find because he released it a couple of years ago, I think. It took him a while to release it. Broadway stuff, I worked on the remount of West Side Story when they did it in 2008.
Hmm.
I think they've since done it another time. White Christmas. So those were the Broadway shows, and those a couple other operas I was working on. But for movies, that was it. Not as many. Yeah, and I started working for a movie producer at the very end of that too. But those were taking movies and turning them into Broadway shows, and so unless you were there in 2010, then we already missed them.
Fair enough. Well, it sounds like it
Yeah.
was a fun time and a lot of good experience and opportunities. Now, I think as I mentioned before, you got into or you were doing that at the time, and then the era 2008 came around, housing crash kind of hit the industry pretty hard and kind of caused a shift in your trajectory. So maybe you kind of pick up from there.
Yeah. So 2008, 2009, Lehman Brothers collapses. All of that has a ripple effect, particularly in New York, because that is who funds oftentimes the Broadway productions. And so everything started shutting down 2009 into 2010. So there were no new productions coming out. The designers that I was working for who had multiple jobs lined up. Those all got put on hold. The actual costume shops that make all these and like the scenic shops, those all got shut down for a while because there was just nothing. And so I worked, I was rehired at Juilliard for a little bit to work on a couple of shows and then made the decision that I needed to figure something else out because I wasn't sure how long this was going to last. I had bills to pay, and I, just needed to continue to have some kind of an income. And I wasn't in a position financially that was like financially stable whatsoever, just coming out of graduate school. So I applied for a few jobs in New York because I was like, I maybe have a direct connection to like a sales job or something. And when I would do a lot of interviews, they'd often look at my resume and then they would ask me questions about Al Pacino. It was a very weird interviewing experience, and I was like, I need a job. I don't need to tell you stories about drinking with Al Pacino. And then I made the decision at a certain point of like, you know what, I've kind of hit my head against the wall too many times. My funds are running out. I didn't know what else to do. So I was like, let me just pack up my things and I'll go back to Indiana and kind of regroup. Fortunately, I have, again, very supportive parents who were like, yeah, come on back. It's no problem. Coincidentally, at that same time, so many other people were doing the same thing. And so I landed back in Indiana at the end of 2010 and immediately was hired as an adjunct professor at Indiana University. But I also had more bills to pay. So I was cleaning offices in the evening and I started waiting tables in between. And that's kind of when I realized that other people were in a similar situation as me. So my boss at the restaurant would joke that she had like the smartest wait staff because it was myself. Like there was a lawyer from Notre Dame who was just like just graduated, didn't have any jobs. There were two doctors, like one was from Duke. Like it was so again, she was very proud of us coming from very prestigious universities. Was kind of in this wait and see because the economy is collapsing market. And so I was just kind of figuring it out on the fly while I was in Indiana. And again, fortunately, parents that helped me out. So at least my housing was solved. And then I was just working really hard on the other side of it to pay off student loans and other kind of bills.
No, that makes sense. And so now, kind of with amidst of all that, kind of figuring out next steps, where you're going to head, what you're going to do, and I think they got into bottled water at some point, and then they're shifted
Yes,
again. So maybe kind of walk through that progression of as you're
from those
kind
two.
of settling on the next phase of the journey, kind of where you went.
Yeah, so it was during that time, right after that, I talked my way into, let's say, my first real full-time job, which was for a TV station, and I was selling advertising, and I had no business doing it. But they're like, yep, they paid me a very small amount, and they handed me a phone book, and they said, go sell. And so I went door to door, business to business as a salesperson, talking to all these companies. The one thing I did learn from that process is just understanding the pain points of small businesses and what they were looking for and how they would talk about their companies. And then on my breaks, I would go to Barnes and Nobles. They actually had um, lots of physical locations at this time in 2010, and I would read random books on the shelf. And then I got an idea about how to potentially launch a company without having to spend a lot of money. And that's kind of where things kind of took off. Around the same time, I had just been reading about some new trends, and I landed on bottled water as like a up and coming trend, particularly alkaline water. And I had my own interest in bottled water anyway for my own health issues. And so I was like, you know what, bottled water sounds kind of cool. I don't know a lot about it. Let's see what I can do. And me blindly walking in, I think was to my benefit. Because if I would have known actually like how complicated the beverage industry is, I probably would have been like, nope, not like it's not even worth it. But I didn't know anything. I was like, it is not going to cost, like it's not going to be that complicated. Let me just try to go into this. And so what really helped out was that on my parents' property, my dad had started a catering company and built this freestanding building. And then he was like, I don't want to use this anymore. If you want to kind of, rework it and rebuild it, you're more than welcome to. And so I had the water tested on my parents' property, and because it's the middle of nowhere in Indiana, the water quality is very good. So it was already naturally occurring alkaline water with a high calcium and magnesium content. So it was like, that's great. And I had access to this facility that I had to just retrofit to be a bottling water plant. So it kind of like the biggest costs initially to launching this were already kind of sorted out for me. So that was great. And then it also worked out that a few weeks after that, I had my parents like to throw a lot of dinner parties. Some of their friends came over, and two of them were now consultants. And so I pitched them my idea, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll definitely help you." And so these two, their name are Steve and Jeff. They were part of the original dot-com bubble. So they started a furniture company in Michigan, and then it became the world's largest online furniture retailer. And they sold it before the dot-com bubble, and then that company then it was collapsed, and I think they rebought it afterward. But they went through that process before, so they understood e-commerce, and so they're like, "Yeah, we'll walk you through, you know, B2C e-commerce for bottled water. We're not going to invest any money in this, but we will walk you through how to do all this." And so that was phenomenal. And they helped me build the first website, and I, did some test areas. And essentially what I did was I photoshopped a lot of things together and made it look like everything exists. And I spoke with local retailers and companies. And so I created my own Indiegogo or Kickstarter account before that existed. And so I made it look like the water existed, and I put ads on Google AdWords to kind of test it out. And within a week and a half, I had my first sales. And because I had everything already lined up, I was like, okay, great. I now have sales. Let me buy this. And I used to batch the orders. And so it just kind of started ramping it up from there. And then from there, I got better at how to tell the story of the water, placement of the water. I got into Whole Foods because they built the local Whole Foods. And so I built up the company bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then in 2015, it was featured in the Oscars, and it won the best tasting water in the world. And then within a week and a half, the state of Indiana decided that they wanted to close down my company because they didn't understand essentially how small businesses, startups operate. They understand small businesses, they also understand large corporations, but I was operating in between all of this. And so they're like, you don't have this large bottling facility. I had everything cleared when I first started, but then things changed. And so they essentially made it impossible for my company to operate without building a large Coke bottling plant, and I was nowhere near that. And so I shut down the company, and at the same time, I had been a professor at Indiana University again, teaching set design, and I started giving lectures on the connection between art and entrepreneurship. Then from there, um, applied for a couple of new entrepreneurship programs that were coming up, and that's how I got to Boston. So Emerson College was looking to launch a new creative entrepreneurship program, and so simultaneously I closed my bottled water company and decided it was time to start fresh somewhere else, and packed up my bags and moved to Boston to launch this program at Emerson.
Now, kind of what pushed you in that direction? What kind of, in other words, you started out doing kind of plays on Broadway by no fault of your own, pretty big shift due to or downturn in the world economy. Went into bottled water. Government kind of let you do that for a while until you kind of got tripped up there. Otherwise, had to shut that down. Now, how did you kind of figure out what was that, where you're going to go, or what that next phase was? I mean, you started to hint into what that was, but kind of how did you kind of pick yourself up again and figure out what you're going to do next?
So I because I because of the theater background or my theater background, I'm used to doing multiple things simultaneously. And so while I was running the bottled water company, also still a professor, that's actually how I paid the bills, so I didn't have to take any money out from the company. But I have a tendency of also like looking at my own life and where I want it to go, and then can kind of baby step toward that. Throughout this process, I knew that there was going to be some kind of inflection point in my bottled water company because as I was running it, it was kind of unsustainable. I was doing everything. So I was running I had a couple of interns that worked with me, but that was it. And they would come in and help out when we had a lot of big orders, but I'd, go teach in the daytime, come at home at night, start bottling everything up and pack it all up. And it was just unsustainable long term. And I wanted to build out the company. So I knew I either needed to either make that grow or shut it down. So unfortunately or fortunately, like whatever, the decision was made for me. At least there was an actual inflection point where I had to make a very critical decision of like, I go raise a bunch of money and do this, or I just stop. And so there was that point, and I already had started getting into the world of art and entrepreneurship and finding that so many, from my own background, my biggest complaints from even to this day of a lot of the arts programs that I went to was that they never taught me, and they still don't teach graduates how to make any money from their art. So they'll teach you how to do it, but not like how to survive. And that's again, that's my current criticism of that current program. And I was just on the Yale campus a couple weeks ago with this same thing.
Yeah, and
So
just as a
yeah,
caveat, I would probably say that's 99.9% of degrees I would have that same gripe with. The same as the
yes.
legal career. I'm in, I went to law school, did all that. I even got an MBA, and the gap between real world application and what is the theoretical is pretty far between. And those that can figure out be successful, those that don't usually work for someone else that has. And so I'm right there with you that they tend to almost across the board on most schools and most degrees have that gap. So didn't mean to interject, just was putting in a bit of an agreement there.
No, it's quite all right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, precisely. Like you're right. Doctors, lawyers, like a lot of degrees have this whole problem where they're not doing that. Um, and so what I wanted to do was how could I help solve this? And I thought that by being a professor and helping one of these programs grow that was focused on the connection between art and entrepreneurship, we would be turning out different types of graduates. And that was the thesis behind it. And that's what I started giving. It was like, if nothing else, I'll be able to give more lectures on this and then get another source of income by being paid to do that. And it just so happened that an opening was available in Emerson College, and so that's that. I was like, you know what? It's an opening. It's a new change. Let's go for it. And so I took the leap and moved across the country back to the East Coast into Boston and was like, let's just go for it.
No, I think that sounds like it was a good opportunity and maybe a good position. So now you did that, kind of walks through, you did that for a period of time, and that kind of leads up to transitions to where you're at today, or kind of, or walk us through kind of from there
Yeah.
to where you're today, kind of how that progressed.
Sure. So the last little bits of like that, so that's like so that was 10 years ago. So in the last 10 years, a couple of things happened. So during my time at Emerson, my first time in Boston, I spent a lot of time in the community because I wanted to have my students get out of their walls and meet other people. And that's how and being in Boston, there's a tremendous innovation ecosystem here. And so I met a lot of connections to Harvard and MIT and a few of the other places. And through there, one of the professors introduced me to the concept of blockchain. And so I started going down the blockchain rabbit hole in 2015. At the same time, I left my teaching position after a year and got involved into another startup. It was a 3D print to 3D, sorry, 3D scan, 3D print sunglass company. So we would 3D scan your face, 3D print, and I did that for a couple different reasons. I was excited about the opportunity to get really involved in emerging technology and really apply what I had learned running a bottled water company to see if, the marketing chops I thought I had was a fluke or if it was real and if I could replicate it in something totally different in a different field. And so I jumped in to that area and I ran our Indiegogo campaign. Never did that before, but I walked in and essentially took a prototype and launched it within a month and a half. And we ended up raising close to $1 million on Indiegogo. I had the product and the two co-founders featured on the Discovery Channel, Inc., Forbes, like Boston. The local news station gave them a couple of interviews, again, Boston Magazine, the Boston Globe. Like, so I realized that the formula I had created to get press and marketing worked very well across multiple different areas. And it worked very well for them. The problem was during all of that process, what I didn't take into account was the actual human factor. And so when the more places I got them featured, so they eventually also became Forbes 30 under 30. the more their egos grew and the more they were like, hey, we know what's best. Not, I positioned your story in a way that made it very easy for a reporter to write about you. And so they ended up, before our next round of fundraising, deciding to pivot the company and to be a lifestyle brand versus a tech company, which is where we were. And because of that, the company was like on a downward, very fast trajectory. Because we had no real customers, we had no real feedback, we were still like prototyping a lot of things, and so I saw the writing on the wall that they were just going to collapse the company, and so I decided to get out, and that's where eventually led me into the current role that I'm in right now. So I interviewed for a few different places. I met my first boss, which allowed me to get hired at Autodesk. Um, because at that time they had just built an open innovation center and they needed someone to be part of the marketing team. And that's because of my connections in the community, that's how I was hired in. Had I tried to go in a traditional sense to a corporation, never probably would have happened because especially then I checked none of the boxes that corporates want because I have a very untraditional background. But it just so happened that I met the right person at the right time, and he was like, I need someone with your kind of expertise. And so that's how I got hired in. And then since then, I've been moving around the company in a similar way of this career that I've had. And so I look at multiple different areas that are emerging. It just so happened that my group got pulled into the research department, which is why I'm technically what's why I'm in Autodesk research. And then as opportunities arose, I went back to school. I went to MIT, and then that allowed another opportunity as the company was building out more AI capabilities. They needed someone to help on the business analytics side, and there wasn't anybody in research doing that. And so I volunteered, and then that became my job. And so that's kind of how all of this has evolved, just by me, my own curiosity, volunteering for things, and then working on it at the same time.
No, sounds like it was a fun evolution and a good path to get to where we're at today. So kind of catching or up a bit to where things are at today, maybe give us, if you're to look out now to the next kind of 6 to 12 months, kind of where things are headed, kind of what do you see as being next in store and what's kind of what does that path look like for you?
Sure. So 6 to 12 months. So for me, it's expanding. So my role is expanding. Again, AI becoming very much more popular everywhere. And so part of what my role right now is to separate the fact from fiction. And so a lot of companies are talking about what they're doing with AI, but most of it is noise or marketing hype. And so part of it then is like building out better strategies to figure out what our competitors are doing and how we can kind of fill in there. I'm also trying to build out a larger team, but that's a little bit beyond my direct control. It just depends on need and availability of internal funds. But so far, it's been going pretty well. And then again, like I said, I can't just do one thing on the side. There's another startup that I'm slowly working on with a friend of mine, just because I like to see what's going on. And so who knows? That may in the next 6 months that may pop, and I might just make the leap over there. But I'm always open for opportunities, and that's what I keep my eyes open for.
Awesome. Well, sounds like plenty to keep you engaged and busy and hopefully a little bit of fun along the way. So, well, perfect. Well, now as we've kind of caught up to the present day of the journey and even looking a bit into the future, great time to transition to the couple questions I like to ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. So
Sure.
the first question I'd like to ask you is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What did you learn from it?
Yeah. So the worst decision I made was actually not speaking with a lawyer sooner, which is again interesting that I'm speaking with you. So I had a feeling and I was dancing on, let's say, an edge because I was in the alkaline water industry and many of my competitors were on pushing the health benefits. I was not doing that, but that's where I thought, honestly, I may get in trouble. Is like if I said something, said something or walked too far on the health benefit side of it, which is not substantiated. I did not see that the Department of Health would suddenly decide to change the local laws, and then I had to then go hire an attorney for that. So having I think meeting with a lawyer sooner, just kind of understanding the bottled water landscape in a better way in Indiana, especially since there are no bottled water laws. I had to hire a beverage attorney anyway who got me up to speed, so that sooner. Granted, I had no money, so that's why I put that off. But like, I wish I would have had that conversation sooner. That would have prepared me for what eventually happened.
Gotcha. No, and it is one where it's a hard balance. If you had unlimited funds, bandwidth, and availability, you would do all those things early on. And yet sometimes when you jump, or you always kind of push that off to, hey, I'll do that when I have the time or the bandwidth or the funds, and then it catches up with you before you get to it, and can cause other issues. So definitely an easy mistake to make, but a good one to learn from. Second question now that I'd like to ask is, so now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what's one rule of thumb you'd recommend?
Yeah, my one rule of thumb I'd recommend is learn how to get really good at marketing and do it yourself. It is surprisingly easy to stand out from everybody around you by getting good at telling your story. And that's essentially like all I really did with bottled water. Like nobody really, again, I can say this now, but like it was fancy water in a cobalt blue glass bottle. But the reason why people would spend $9 a bottle was because this kid from Indiana who then worked on Broadway started it again and had a very unique story. And that the story of the bottled water is what sold it. It wasn't necessarily the water itself. So get really good at telling your story and don't be afraid to understand your own marketing and do it yourself versus let someone else do it for you.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great rule of thumb and a great takeaway as well. Well, now as we do wrap up towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. So I'm very easy to find online on LinkedIn. I'm Yuri Cataldo on LinkedIn, or if you find my website, yuricataldo.com. That's a list of like currently like some projects I'm working on and what I do, and also my list of speaking engagements, where I'm going. And then I have a book, a couple books out if someone's interested in those. But that's where you can find all of that information.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, support a great business, expand their network, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a fun pleasure. Now, for all of you listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to share and you'd like to be a guest on podcasts, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveunicorn.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review. It helps us to reach even more in startups and small businesses to help them along their journey to success. And along that note, if along your journey you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Devin. Appreciate it.
We plant, my friend. Dusty boots, but a heart of gold. Your story's waiting to be told. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising, small be shine. Your time is now, your stars align. Cowbell ring and feel the beat. Hustle hard, don't take a seat. Every step you're blazing trail. Inventive journey never fails. Inventive journey, here we go. Through highs and lows, we let it flow. Startups rising small but shine. Your time is now, your start.